It was still dark outside when Nurse Emily Parker tied her hair into a messy bun and adjusted her pale blue scrubs. The smell of disinfectant clung to the air as she entered the hospital wing, her footsteps echoing faintly through the quiet corridor. It was her third double shift that week, but she didn't mind. Helping others made her feel alive, even if her own life had started to feel empty. At 27, Emily had no family left. Her mother had died of kidney failure when she was 18. Her father, heartbroken, had followed 2 years later. Since then, the hospital had become her second home, the only place where she felt needed, where someone always required her touch, her words, or her kindness. That morning, as she reviewed patient charts, the head surgeon, Dr. Harper, approached her. "Emily," he said quietly, "we've got a new case, critical. Middle-aged male, kidney failure, condition deteriorating fast. We need to find a match soon or he won't make it." Emily nodded sympathetically. "Any family?" Dr. Harper sighed. "No, he's alone. No next of kin listed. He's refused to say who he is, but he's under private care. High profile, from what I hear." Emily didn't ask more. She just did her job. Later that afternoon, she stepped into room 304, the patient's room. The man lying on the bed looked pale and frail, his face half hidden under the oxygen mask. But even in weakness, there was something powerful about him. His posture, his expression, his eyes, the kind that had once commanded rooms. His name on the chart read Alexander Reed. When Emily took his vitals, he opened his eyes slightly. "You're new," he said, his voice low, but calm. "Yes," Emily replied gently. "I'm Nurse Emily. I'll be taking care of you today." He gave a faint smile. "Taking care of me? That's a full-time job these days." She smiled back, used to humor masking pain. Over the next few days, she learned little bits about him. He was quiet but observant. Always polite. Sometimes, she'd catch him staring out the window, lost in thought. He didn't have visitors. Not a single one. Emily had seen loneliness before, but something about his felt different, heavier, deeper. One evening, as she was adjusting his IV line, she noticed his hand tremble. "You okay?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment before saying softly, "It's strange. I've built an empire, employed thousands of people, but when you're lying here, waiting to die, none of it matters." Emily froze. "You built an empire?" He gave a half smile. "I used to run Reed Enterprises. Maybe you've heard of it." Her eyes widened. Everyone had heard of it. It was one of the biggest real estate and tech companies in the country. "But I thought," she started, then stopped, "that I'd be surrounded by people. Friends. Family." He said bitterly. "No, money buys loyalty, not love." The silence that followed was heavy. Emily looked down, remembering her own loneliness. Two people from different worlds, but somehow, their hearts seemed to understand the same pain. Days passed. His condition worsened. The transplant list was long, and time was running out. That night, as Emily sat in the break room staring at her mother's old photograph, something inside her stirred. She remembered her mother's final days, the pain, the waiting, the hope that never came. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, if only someone had given her a chance. The next morning, Emily walked into Drive Harper's office. "I want to be tested," she said. He looked up. "For what?" "For Alexander Reed. The kidney transplant." "Doctor." Harper frowned. "Emily, you know what that means. It's a serious decision. You're young." "I know," she interrupted softly. "But he's alone. And maybe this is what I'm meant to do." 2 days later, the results came back. She was a perfect match. When Emily told Alexander, he stared at her in disbelief. "You're going to give me your kidney?" "Yes," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, absolutely not. You don't even know me." She smiled faintly. "I don't need to. I just know you need help. And I can help." Alexander turned his face away. "You'll regret it." Emily took his hand gently. "Maybe. But at least I'll regret something that saved a life." He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, fear, awe. The surgery was scheduled for the next week. The night before, Alexander couldn't sleep. He kept thinking, why would a young woman risk her life for him? A stranger. He'd spent years surrounded by people who only wanted his money, his power. But this nurse, she wanted nothing. She gave everything. After the surgery, when Alexander woke up, he saw her through the glass window of the recovery room. Pale, weak, but smiling. For the first time in decades, he felt something shift inside him, a warmth he thought he'd lost forever. Weeks later, when Emily returned to work, she found a bouquet of white lilies on her locker, with a note. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at life, AR." She smiled, touched, but she never saw him again. Months passed. Emily's life returned to normal. Long shifts, sleepless nights, comforting patients. She didn't expect anything in return. What she'd done was enough. Until one morning, Drive, Harper called her into his office. "Emily," he said, looking oddly nervous. "There's someone here to see you." When she stepped out, she froze. Standing by the window in an elegant black suit was Alexander Reed, alive, healthy, confident. He turned as she entered, and for a second, time stopped. "Mr. Reed," she whispered. "Alexander," he corrected gently. "I owe you that much." She smiled shyly. "You look different." He chuckled. "I feel different. Because of you." She shrugged. "I'm just glad you're okay." But Alexander wasn't here just to thank her. He had spent months thinking about her, the nurse who had given him life, asking for nothing. He'd tried to send money, gifts, donations, but every time, she politely refused. That morning, he looked at her with quiet determination. "You gave me life, Emily. Let me give you something back." She shook her head. "You already have. You're living. That's enough." He smiled sadly. "No, it's not." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter offering her a full scholarship to finish medical school, funded by the Reed Foundation. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he said softly. "You believed my life was worth saving. Now I want to make sure yours is worth living, fully." For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from a strange, overwhelming gratitude. Over the next few months, Alexander and Emily began to meet often, at charity events, foundation meetings, coffee breaks that turned into long conversations. They were from different worlds. She was humble, grounded, and kind. He was powerful, lonely, and learning how to feel again. But somehow, they balanced each other. One evening, they stood outside the hospital where they first met. The sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson. Alexander looked at her and said quietly, "You gave me a part of yourself, something I can never repay. But if you let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life trying." Emily froze. Her heart pounded. He took her hand. Not out of pity, not out of debt, but because somewhere along the way, your kindness healed more than my body, it healed my soul. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Are you sure you want to spend your life with a nurse who has nothing?" He smiled softly. "You gave me everything when I had nothing that mattered. That's all I need to know." Under the fading light, he kissed her forehead, gently, gratefully. Years later, their story became known as the nurse's miracle. Emily became Drive, Emily Reed, running a foundation that helped low-income patients get free transplants. And every year, she'd tell her students one thing: kindness is never wasted. Sometimes, it saves a life. Sometimes, it finds you love. And somewhere, deep in the quiet halls of that same hospital, a picture hung, two people smiling under a banner that read, "She gave him life. He gave her forever." The nurse who had once walked alone now walked hand in hand with the man whose life she had saved, proving that sometimes, the greatest miracles come from the simplest acts of compassion. And as their story spread across the world, it reminded millions that love isn't about wealth or power. It's about giving, freely, selflessly, and without expecting anything in return. Because when you give from the heart, the universe always finds a way to give it back. Months passed, and Emily adjusted to her new life with Alexander. Though their worlds were different, their hearts beat in harmony. Alexander still ran Reed Enterprises, but now with a softer hand. The man who once measured success by profit now measured it by the lives he touched. And beside him, Emily was the light that guided his change. Every morning, before heading to work, Alexander would find her sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in her hands, her eyes quietly watching the sunrise. "You never stop working," he'd tease gently. She'd smile. "And you never stop watching." He laughed softly. "Can you blame me? You're the reason I'm still breathing." Sometimes, Emily wondered if she deserved the kind of love he gave her. He was used to luxury, private jets, crystal chandeliers, fine dining. She preferred quiet evenings, books, and laughter. But Alexander never tried to change her. Instead, he brought her into his world slowly, making sure she always felt like she belonged. At charity events, people would whisper, "That's the nurse who gave him her kidney." Some looked in admiration, others in disbelief. But Emily didn't care about opinions. She only cared about the man whose eyes softened every time they met hers. One night, as they drove back from a hospital fundraiser, heavy rain began to pour. The city lights blurred through the windshield. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "You ever think about fate?" she asked softly. Alexander smiled. "Every day. Especially since the day I met you. Do you think we were meant to find each other?" He took her hand, his thumb tracing the faint scar on her wrist, a reminder of the surgery. If fate hadn't brought you to that hospital, I wouldn't be here. So yes, I believe in it. Because it brought me you. Emily's heart swelled with emotion. She whispered, I just hope I can keep giving you reasons to smile. Alexander looked at her tenderly. You already have. Every single day. But life, as always, had its way of testing love. A few weeks later, during a medical outreach in a rural village, Emily collapsed. She'd been pushing herself too hard, working long hours under the scorching sun. When Alexander received the call, he froze. It felt like the world stopped turning. He arrived by helicopter, running into the small clinic where she lay unconscious. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Emily, he whispered, taking her hand. Please, open your eyes. Dr. Harper, who had accompanied the mission, looked at him gravely. She's exhausted, Alexander. Her remaining kidney is under stress. She needs rest and treatment immediately. Alexander's heart clenched. The thought of losing her was unbearable. For days, he stayed by her side, refusing to leave even for a moment. He held her hand through every drip, every hour of silence. He prayed, something he hadn't done in years. Finally, on the fourth day, Emily's eyes fluttered open. Alexander's breath caught. Hey, there you are. She smiled weakly. You look terrible. He laughed through tears. I've been terrified. Don't you ever do that again. She squeezed his hand. I told you, you can't get rid of me that easily. He kissed her forehead, whispering, I don't ever want to. That moment changed him again. He realized love wasn't just about saving someone, it was about protecting them every day after. When Emily recovered, Alexander surprised her with something extraordinary. He took her to a quiet hill outside the city. The air was fresh, and in the distance stood a newly built medical center, simple but beautiful. The sign at the entrance read, The Emily Parker Care Center, for those who give without expecting. Tears filled her eyes. You built this? He nodded. We built this. Every patient here will get free care, transplants, surgeries, anything. No one should suffer waiting for a miracle like I did. Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Alexander, this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me. He smiled. It's not just for you. It's for your mother too. I read her story in your records. I wanted her name to live here too. And there it was, at the entrance, engraved beneath the center's name. In loving memory of Grace Parker, a mother's heart lives forever. Emily couldn't hold back her tears. She threw her arms around him, crying into his chest. Thank you so much. Alexander held her close. You gave me a part of you, Emily. I just wanted to give a part of the world back to you. From that day, they worked side by side. Emily oversaw the medical operations, Alexander handled funding and expansion. Together, they built not just hospitals but hope, for those who had none. Years passed, and their love only deepened. They faced challenges, but always together, hand in hand. Then, one evening, after a long day at the center, Emily sat beside him in the garden. Fireflies danced in the air, and the moonlight bathed everything in silver. I never imagined this life, she whispered. Alexander smiled. Neither did I, but maybe that's what makes it perfect. She rested her head on his shoulder. You know, I used to think I'd live my whole life alone, just working, helping others, fading quietly someday. But you changed that." He kissed her hair gently. "And you changed me. You taught me what it means to truly live." She smiled. "Promise me something, anything. No matter what happens, keep helping people. Even when I can't." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean, when you can't?" She laughed softly. "I'm just saying, life is unpredictable. I want what we started to live forever." He looked at her with a mix of love and fear. "It will, Emily. Because love like ours doesn't end. It keeps giving, like your heart always did." Years later, long after their hair had turned silver, Alexander stood once again outside the hospital where they first met. The same hallway, the same quiet hum of machines. Only this time, a portrait hung on the wall, of a young nurse in blue scrubs, smiling gently, holding a patient's hand. Below it read, "Nurse Emily Parker Reed, the woman who gave life, and taught the world to love." Alexander, now older and frailer, smiled up at the portrait. His eyes glistened. "You kept your promise," he whispered. "You never stopped helping." He placed a single white lily, her favorite, beneath the frame, then turned to leave, his steps slow but steady. Outside, the sun was setting, and children were playing near the fountain she had designed. Their laughter filled the air, the sound of life continuing. As he looked at the sky, a soft breeze brushed against his face, and for a moment, he swore he could hear her voice, calm, warm, and full of love. "I told you, Alexander, kindness always finds its way back." He smiled, whispering into the wind, "Yes, it does, my love. Yes, it does." And as the golden light faded into night, the story of a nurse and a lonely CEO became more than a tale. It became a legend of compassion, sacrifice, and the kind of love that transcends time itself. Because sometimes, the smallest act of giving can create ripples that touch generations. And somewhere in that eternal ripple, their love lived on. 10 years later, the Emily Parker Care Foundation had expanded into several cities. Thousands of patients who once had no hope now lived because of her dream. Her name had become a symbol of compassion. Nurses whispered it with pride, doctors used it as inspiration, and families prayed to meet people like her. Alexander Reed, now in his late 70s, still visited the hospital every morning. He didn't have the same strength, but he carried the same smile, the one Emily had given him. Every corner of the foundation reminded him of her. The garden where she liked to read to children. The patient ward painted in soft blue, her favorite color. Even the faint scent of lilies that seemed to linger in the halls. He'd sit near the children's wing, watching little ones play. They called him Grandpa Alex. And he loved it. He'd tell them stories, not of wealth or business, but of a nurse who gave her heart to the world. Was she really real? A small girl asked one afternoon, her big brown eyes full of wonder. Alexander smiled gently. "Oh yes, very real. She was the bravest person I ever met. She saved me, not just my life, but my soul." The little girl tilted her head. "Did you love her?" He looked out the window, where the sun painted the sky orange and gold. "More than anything," he whispered. That evening, after everyone left, Alexander walked to the memorial garden behind the hospital. It was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the sound of wind chimes. In the center stood a white marble bench, engraved with Emily's favorite quote. "To give is to live twice." He sat down slowly, his cane resting beside him. His hand brushed over her name carved in the stone. "I kept my promise, Emily," he said softly. "Every child here has a chance to live, because of you. Every heartbeat in these halls belongs to your kindness." He took a deep breath, feeling the evening breeze brush his face. It felt like her, gentle, warm, eternal. Closing his eyes, he whispered, "I'll be seeing you soon." That night, the stars shone brighter than usual. And somewhere, in the stillness of the world, Alexander Reed's heart found peace. The next morning, when the nurses found him on that same bench, he was sitting upright, his face serene, a soft smile resting on his lips. In his hand was a single lily, freshly plucked from the garden. The hospital mourned. The world did too. News channels and social media flooded with tributes, not for the CEO, but for the man who had turned his fortune into compassion. And beside every tribute, there was always her name, Emily Parker. They were remembered not as a nurse and a businessman, but as two souls who proved that love could rewrite destiny. A year later, the foundation launched a new project, the Reed Parker Fellowship, offering full scholarships to nurses and doctors who wished to serve in rural areas. At the inauguration, Drive, Harper, now retired, stood before a sea of students. He looked at their eager faces and said, "Remember, greatness doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from the courage to care." Once, a young nurse gave her kidney to a stranger. She didn't know he was a millionaire. She just knew he needed help. That act of love changed the world. And it can again, through all of you. The audience stood in silence, some with tears in their eyes. As the ceremony ended, a new generation of nurses walked into the future carrying the legacy of two people whose love story became a movement. Years rolled on. The world changed. Technology advanced. Skyscrapers rose. But somewhere in every hospital, in every act of selfless care, Emily and Alexander lived on. Their portraits hung side by side in the main hall of the foundation, Emily in her nurse's uniform, Alexander in his suit, both smiling. Beneath them, a plaque read, "She gave him life. He gave it meaning. Together, they gave the world hope." One quiet evening, a young nurse named Lily, named after Emily's favorite flower, placed a candle below their portraits. She had just completed a successful kidney transplant on a little boy. Her patient had survived because of the free program started by the foundation decades earlier. As the flame flickered, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Nurse Emily. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Because of you, we still believe in miracles." And perhaps, somewhere beyond time, two souls smiled, hand in hand, watching the world they built continue to heal, to love, to give. Because true love doesn't end when hearts stop beating. It lives in every act of kindness left behind. And the story of the young nurse and the lonely CEO became not just a tale told on screens or in books, it became a heartbeat shared by millions. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you, love is not about what we take, but what we give. Every act of kindness echoes forever. So be the reason someone believes in hope again. Don't forget to like, share,